The movie is set in the year 2050. It's been found that dark energy is destabilizing the sun, and it is quickly dying, threatening all life on Earth with a new ice age. However, after some serious research, scientists have concluded that a nuclear fission bomb with a mass equivalent of Manhattan Island can reignite the dying sun. The Icarus I, a prototype spacecraft with advanced heat shielding and a sophisticated artificial intelligence, is tasked with the arduous journey of transporting the payload to the sun. An experienced crew, led by Captain Pinbacker, is sent for the mission, but unfortunately, it fails, and the spacecraft is lost in space. 7 years have passed by, and humanity is making a second attempt to resuscitate the sun with the Icarus II. The crew consists of the mission leader, Captain Kaneda, and several other experienced members, like physicist Robert Capa, who is overseeing the final calculations for the bomb's payload deployment and detonation, Mace, the head engineer, and Corazon, the botanist responsible for maintaining the oxygen garden that provides both food and carbon to recycle the atmosphere during the trip. After 16 long months, the ship finally nears the sun. However, the solar noise known as the dead zone begins to interfere with radio communications to Earth a week earlier than expected. As a result, the crew is left with just 24 hours to collect all of their individual thoughts and send them to their loved ones back home. During Kappa's turn, he has difficulty finding the right words and makes several attempts at his message, unintentionally exhausting all of the remaining time. This enrages Mace, and a fight breaks out between the two. Fortunately, the crew breaks their fight and sends Mace to spend some time in the Earth Room, which simulates the exact atmosphere on Earth. Later, when the crew meets to discuss their latest progress, the spacecraft botanist, Corazon, notes that the ship already has enough oxygen stored up for the delivery and the return trip. As they get closer to the sun, the ship's medical physician, Dr. Cyril, becomes fascinated with the view from the ship's viewport. He becomes curious to experience the unfiltered view of the sun. However, the AI warns him that he can only tolerate 3.1% of the actual light. Despite this, Cyril keeps exposing himself to the sun, causing his skin to peel away. Meanwhile, Captain Kaneda researches the video logs of Captain Pinbacker, the commander of Icarus I, in an attempt to discover why the original mission failed. He plays one video where Pinbacker describes a small meteor storm that did superficial damage to the Icarus I. As the ship approaches Mercury, communications specialist Harvey picks up a signal from the Icarus I's distress beacon. However, he only hears faint signals because it was amplified by the iron in Mercury's mass. He becomes sure that some of those aboard Icarus I could still be alive and discusses with his crew whether the current mission should be altered in order to check on the Icarus I's distress beacon. As expected, Mace is not happy with the suggestion, and he tells everyone that it's a dangerous mission. However, Dr. Searle contradicts that diverting to the Icarus I could possibly add a second bomb, and having two could be advantageous if something goes wrong with the first one. This results in a heated discussion, and Captain Kaneda puts an end to it by handing the decision to the ship's most informed person in these matters, their nuclear physicist, Robert Capa. However, Capa also has a hard time making a decision. Left with no choice, he flips a coin, which finalizes them heading to rescue Icarus I. What? No, you're not Two-Face, you're Scarecrow. The crew is forced to oblige, and the ship's navigator Trey plots the course. He checks it 3 separate times and becomes sure that he has been accurate. Trey then shifts the Icarus II's course to intercept the Icarus I. However, in the many calculations, Trey misses one: the need to readjust the heat shield that protects the ship from the sun's radiation. Sounds important. How did he miss that? This error is discovered when there is an emergency declared by the computer after slight damage to the heat shield. Unfortunately, the true extent of the damage can only be assessed and repaired by leaving the ship and working out in space. Captain Kaneda and Capa volunteer for the dangerous mission and start the necessary preparations. As the two exit the ship in EVA suits to begin repairs, the pilot, Cassie, reorients the Icarus II in order to provide the two spacewalking astronauts as much shade as she can. She does this despite knowing that it will result in the loss of the 2 communications towers needed to return to Earth later. In no time, the tips of the comm towers burn up as they continue to revolve around the living quarters, in and out of the sunlight. Consequently, Cassie unwittingly sets off another chain of events when the still revolving and burning remnants of the communications tower causes a beam of sunlight to deflect towards the center of the ship and onto the oxygen garden. Soon, a fire breaks out that burns down the garden and threatens to engulf the entire ship. Corazon quickly rushes to a rapidly burning garden and requests entry, thinking that she can save it. However, Mace weighs up the situation and realizes that the mission captain and the ship will be lost unless drastic action is taken. So, he orders the computer to release all the stored oxygen in the tanks to provide such an enormous boost to the fire that it will literally blow itself out. He also realizes that this will completely destroy the garden. During this event, the artificial intelligence begins to take automatic control of the Icarus II. It also tries to return the heat shield back to cover the living quarters, despite the fact that it is currently protecting Captain and Kappa, who are still outside. Cassie realizes that this maneuver will result in the death of the two spacewalkers, and she tries to countermand the order, but the AI refuses to budge. With time running out, the AI and Cassie fight over control for a few moments, with the latter eventually using an override command that needs to be authorized by a second crew member. Cassie turns to Mace and seeks his authorization code, but he refuses. He believes that the importance of the mission far outweighs the loss of Kaneda and Kappa. Cassie then pleads with Harvey, and fortunately, he issues his authorization. Enraged, Mace directly calls Captain Kaneda and asks him to support him in countermanding the orders issued by Cassie and Harvey, a decision that will result in his own death and that of Kappa. As expected, the dutiful Captain Kaneda agrees with Mace that the mission is more important than his and Kappa's life. The captain then tells the AI to resume corrective shading and proceed with the mission. The AI obliges, and as the cover for the two astronauts is diminished, Kaneda orders Kappa to go back to the safety of the ship as he patches the last of the heat shield damage by himself. Kappa reluctantly complies, and shortly after Kaneda fixes the remaining damage, he is exposed to the sun and killed. Because of the loss of their oxygen garden, the crew is now forced to intercept Icarus I. Trey panics and starts blaming himself for the incident. Hence, the crew puts him inside an isolation room so that he doesn't commit the unthinkable. In the next scene, the ship eventually reaches Icarus I. Searle, Kappa, Mace, and Harvey board the ship through an airlock and discover that there is enough food, a flourishing oxygen garden, and a workable payload aboard. However, there has been extensive damage to the ship's computer servers, which will not allow the ship to move. The crew also sees a video log from the late Icarus I's captain, Pinbacker. In the video, Pinbacker is sporting signs of disfigurement and suggests that the ship's crew chose to scrub the mission, believing that humanity's impending destruction was God's will. That's what happens when you send a religious guy to do space science. Additionally, all crew members of Icarus I are found burned to death in the viewing room, which is a result of the protective filter being turned off. As the group continues investigating, the airlock connecting the two ships gets mysteriously destroyed, and both ships are pulled apart. The crew inside Icarus I panics and looks around for ways to escape. They eventually find one EVA suit, and Mace and Searle decide that Kappa should use it, as he is the only one able to deploy the payload. Why was Mace cool with Kappa dying earlier then? However, communication specialist Harvey, who is also the new captain following Kaneda's death, wants the suit for himself. This results in a brief argument, but Harvey is eventually dismissed. The crew then decides amongst themselves that Searle will stay back at Icarus I to manually open the shafts, while Harvey and Mace use the insulation of the ship to cover themselves so that they can hold on to Kappa as he is shot towards the Icarus II. Unfortunately, during the attempt, Kappa and Mace make it to the Icarus II, but the former loses his grip on Harvey. As a result, Harvey drifts off into outer space and is frozen. His body can be seen breaking apart when it collides with the ship, and burning up when his corpse leaves the protection of the heat shield. That's a badass way to go. Meanwhile, Searle enters Icarus I's viewing room to prepare for his death, and as soon as Icarus II leaves, the shielding from the sun is gone, and Searle is burned to death. Back at the Icarus II, Corazon calculates how much oxygen they have, and how much they need to complete the mission. After a bit of research, she concludes that there is enough oxygen for 4 of the 5 of them to live and deliver the payload. Realizing that Trey is the biggest liability, the crew reluctantly decides to finish him off. However, when Mace goes to carry out the act, he finds Trey has already committed the unthinkable. The psychotic Mace then viciously smears some of the blood on Kappa's hand, blaming him for Trey's death. Soon, a fight breaks out between the two, but it doesn't last long as they have trouble breathing. Kappa immediately heads to the payload room and learns from the AI that there is still not enough oxygen for all of them to live until they deliver the payload. This puzzles Kappa, as Corazon did the math, and there should be enough oxygen for all 4 surviving crew members. Surprisingly, the AI tells him that there are actually 5 people on board the ship at the moment, and the 5th person is in the viewing room. Stunned, Kappa races to the viewing room and discovers that Pinbacker, captain of Icarus I, is still alive. He is terribly burnt everywhere on his body and is clearly psychotic. It is also revealed that he is the one who destroyed the airlock connecting the 2 ships earlier. Pinbacker slices the wound in Kappa's chest with a stolen scalpel and chases him through the ship. Kappa makes it to the EVA suit room and locks himself in. However, Pinbacker Pinbacker pulls the safety lever and traps him in the room. The lunatic then removes the Icarus II's computer servers from their coolant, causing the entire ship to shut down. Here, it is revealed that he did the same on his own ship, and that is how his crew died. Unbeknownst to all of this, Corazon finds a tiny seedling growing out of the burnt soil in the burned-out oxygen garden. This gives her and the mission hope of not just survival, but even returning to Earth. Excited, she calls out for Kappa and Cassie, but ends up attracting the attention of Pinbacker, who brutally murders her. Elsewhere, Mace goes into the cooling unit to fix the Icarus II's mainframe by immersing himself in the coolant. He somehow manages to get the power back on, but in the process, becomes severely frostbitten. On the other hand, Pinbacker starts going after Cassie. He chases her throughout the ship, prompting her to hide in the nuclear payload. Meanwhile, trapped in the EVA suit room, Kappa talks to Mace before he dies. Mace, in agony from the freezing coolant, tells Kappa not to worry, because he's going to wake up in New York City in about 70 years. Wait, what? Oh, sorry. He tells Kappa that he'll have to manually decouple the nuclear payload from Icarus and fly it directly into the sun. He eventually passes away while begging Kappa to complete the mission. Later, Kappa punctures the inner door with a welding torch and escapes from the room by donning an EVA suit. He then decouples the payload and walks to the front hatch of the ship. As the payload and Icarus II drift apart, Kappa uses the propulsion unit of his EVA suit to fly to the payload. As soon as he lands, the payload's thrusters fire and burn up part of the Icarus II, causing the ship to explode. Shortly after, Kappa goes into the payload to manually pilot and ignite it. There, he finds a distraught Cassie and tries to help her up, but just then, the psychotic Pinbacker arrives at the scene and ambushes Kappa. He starts rambling about God and is about to finish off Kappa, but fortunately, Cassie comes to the rescue. The two then double up and eventually escape Pinbacker's clutches. By this time, the payload is neared the sun's surface. Kappa sees Pinbacker on the edge of the bomb, but decides to concentrate on the task at hand. He quickly ignites the payload and starts the nuclear reaction. In no time, the sun bursts into large flames, and Kappa stares into it as if he has found peace. He even touches the flames before dying. Back on Earth, Robert Kappa's sister and her children are outside in a park covered with snow as she watches the last message sent to her by Kappa. The movie ends as the sun finally comes out after years and brightens the frozen Sydney harbor, indicating that the heroic crew has succeeded in their mission.